is not a test. This is rock and roll.
On August 11th, 2014, the world woke up to news that felt impossible to process.
People around this country, and for that matter around the world, are reacting tonight to the terrible news of the death of Robin Williams.
Robin Williams, the man who had made millions laugh for 4 decades, was gone. He'd taken his own life at age 63.
On August 11th, 2014, at approximately 11:55 a.m., that a male adult had been located unconscious and not breathing inside his residence that was in an apparent suicide due to a hanging had taken place.
For someone who brought so much joy to others, how could his own life end in such darkness? The answer would turn out to be far more complicated than anyone initially understood. The man behind the laughter. Robin McLaurin Williams was born in Chicago in 1951, an only child who spent much of his youth alone. His father was a busy Ford Motor Company executive, often absent, and his mother worked as a model. Young Robin grew up in a big house that felt empty most of the time. He'd later say he used comedy to get his mother's attention, doing voices and characters to make her laugh. It worked, but it also planted something deep inside him, a need to perform, to please, to be on. That loneliness followed him even as he became one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. After studying theater at Juilliard and doing stand-up comedy in San Francisco, Williams exploded onto television as Mork and Mindy in 1978. His improvisational genius was unlike anything audiences had seen. Directors learned to just let the cameras roll, because you never knew what Robin would do next. But here's the thing about being Robin Williams. People expected him to be funny all the time. At parties, on set, in interviews, even just walking down the street. Fans would be disappointed if he wasn't doing voices or riffing on something. Imagine that pressure, never being allowed to just be quiet, to be sad, to be normal. One friend said Robin had 2 switches, on and off. There wasn't much in between. When he was performing, he was manic, brilliant, exhausting to watch. When he wasn't, he could retreat into himself completely. The demons he fought. By the late 1970s, Robin was drinking heavily and using cocaine. The comedy scene he came up in was fueled by substances, and Robin threw himself into that lifestyle with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He partied at the Chateau Marmont, stayed up for days, and pushed himself to extremes. It all came to a halt in 1982 when his friend John Belushi died of a drug overdose. Robin had been one of the last people to see Belushi alive that night at the Chateau. The death shook him hard. He got sober, stayed clean for 2 decades, but the underlying issues never went away. Robin struggled with depression his entire adult life, not the kind where you're sad for a few days, the kind that sits on your chest and makes everything feel pointless. He saw therapists on and off for years. He'd talk openly about his battles, trying to destigmatize mental health, but privately the darkness was constant. There's an odd cruelty in being a comedian with depression. Your job is to make others happy while you're drowning inside. Robin once said, "I think the saddest people always try their hardest to make people happy because they know what it's like to feel absolutely worthless, and they don't want anyone else to feel like that." He was describing himself. In 2003, Robin started drinking again. His second marriage had fallen apart. He was struggling financially despite his fame, and the despair caught up with him. He checked himself into rehab in 2006, got sober again, but the pattern was clear. Success hadn't fixed what was broken inside. Money and fame hadn't filled that lonely childhood home. The demons were patient, and they were always waiting. Career highs and personal lows. The irony of Robin Williams' life is that his greatest professional triumphs often coincided with his deepest personal pain. He won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in 1998 for Good Will Hunting, playing a therapist who helps a troubled genius. The speech he gives in that film about his dead wife is devastating. Robin channeled real grief into that performance. His own marriage was crumbling. He'd been married 3 times. His first marriage to Valerie Velarde ended in 1988, strained by his infidelity and addiction. His second marriage to Marcia Garces began while she was his son's nanny and ended in a costly divorce in 2010. These weren't tabloid scandals. They were painful chapters of a man who struggled with intimacy and commitment, who could be present for millions of fans but absent for the people closest to him. Financial pressure was constant, even at the height of his career. The 2010 divorce settlement hit him hard. Robin had to sell his Napa Valley estate. He took television roles he didn't necessarily want, returning to TV with The Crazy Ones in 2013 because he needed the steady paycheck. He'd tell friends, half joking, that he had alimony payments to make. But it wasn't really funny to him. Critics could be brutal too. For every Good Will Hunting or Dead Poet Society, there was a Bicentennial Man, or RV, that got torn apart. Robin was sensitive to criticism in a way that surprised people. He'd remember the negative reviews more than the positive ones. He worried constantly that his best work was behind him, that audiences would stop caring, that he'd end up forgotten. But when he was on, nobody came close. His stand-up specials were masterclasses in controlled chaos. His dramatic roles showed depth that comedy often hid. Films like Good Morning Vietnam, The Fisher King, and 1 Hour Photo revealed an actor with serious range. Still, every triumph felt temporary to Robin. The applause would fade, the set would go dark, and he'd be alone again with his thoughts. The final years. Something started going wrong with Robin Williams in 2013. Not the depression he'd lived with for years. This was different. He began having trouble remembering his lines on the set of The Crazy Ones. Robin Williams, the improv genius who could riff for hours without stopping, was suddenly struggling to recall dialogue. It terrified him. He started experiencing tremors in his left hand. His sense of smell disappeared. He'd have episodes of paranoia and anxiety that came out of nowhere. At night, he'd thrash in his sleep so violently that Susan, his third wife, whom he'd married in 2011, started sleeping in a different room for safety. He'd wake up confused, not knowing where he was. Doctors initially thought it might be Parkinson's disease. The tremors fit. Some of the other symptoms aligned. Robin was devastated by the diagnosis but tried to stay hopeful. At least they knew what it was, or so they thought. But the medications for Parkinson's didn't help. In fact, things got worse. His anxiety spiraled out of control. Robin had always been anxious, but this was something else entirely. He'd become fixated on small things, unable to let thoughts go. His mind, that incredible mind that had created characters and voices and made connections nobody else saw, was turning against him. He told Susan he felt like he was losing his sanity. The last months of Robin's life were a nightmare of doctor's appointments and tests that yielded no clear answers. Depression medications weren't working. Nothing was working. He was forgetting conversations he'd just had. His movements became stiff and slow. The man who'd bounced around stages with endless energy was shuffling like someone decades older. Robin knew something was very wrong. He'd tell Susan, "I just want to reboot my brain." In late July 2014, just weeks before his death, he checked himself into a recovery facility, not for substance abuse, but because he was scared and desperate for help. He stayed for a few days, but there was nothing they could do for what was actually happening inside his brain. August 11th, 2014. Robin Williams spent his last day alive doing ordinary things. He talked with Susan that morning. He seemed calm, more himself than he'd been in weeks. They discussed plans, nothing dramatic or final. She went to bed that night thinking maybe they'd turned a corner. Around 10:30 p.m., she said goodnight through his door. He'd been sleeping in a separate room because of the night terrors. The next morning, around 11:45, Robin's personal assistant found him. He'd taken his own life sometime during the night. The scene was heartbreaking. This man who'd given so much to the world had died alone, in silence, in a way that felt impossibly cruel. News broke fast. Within hours, the world knew. Social media exploded with disbelief and grief.
Breaking news just into CNN is that actor Robin Williams is dead at the age of 63.
How could this be real? Not Robin Williams, not the genie from Aladdin, not the professor from Dead Poet Society, not the guy who'd made everyone laugh at the Oscars. The outpouring was immediate and global. Memorials appeared on Hollywood Boulevard. Celebrities shared tributes. President Obama released a statement. Everyone had a Robin Williams story, a moment when he'd made them laugh or cry or both. But initial reports focused on depression and suicide, implying this was simply a mental health crisis that had spiraled. That Robin had given in to demons he'd fought his whole life. It was a tragic narrative, but it wasn't the whole story, not even close. The autopsy revelation. 3 months after Robin's death, the coroner's report revealed something that changed everything. Robin Williams had diffuse Lewy body dementia, not just early stages. His brain was ravaged by it. The pathologist would later say it was one of the worst cases he'd ever seen. Most people hadn't heard of Lewy body dementia in 2014. It's the second most common form of dementia after Alzheimer's, but it's far less known. The disease occurs when abnormal protein deposits, called Lewy bodies, develop in the brain. These deposits affect chemicals in the brain and lead to problems with thinking, movement, behavior, and mood. Here's what makes it particularly cruel. Lewy body dementia doesn't just steal your memory. It causes hallucinations, severe anxiety, paranoia, rigid muscles, tremors like Parkinson's, and dramatic fluctuations in cognition. One day you might seem relatively normal. The next day you can't function. Patients often report feeling like they're going insane because the symptoms are so varied and unpredictable. Every single symptom Robin experienced in his final year, every terrifying moment, matched Lewy body dementia perfectly. The tremors, the paranoia, the memory loss, the anxiety, the sleep disturbances, all of it. But because the disease is so hard to diagnose while someone is alive, Robin died not knowing what was actually wrong with him. He thought he was losing his mind, and in a very real way, he was. But not because of depression or mental weakness. His brain was under siege from a degenerative disease. The autopsy found Lewy bodies throughout his entire brain, not in one region, everywhere. His brain was being systematically destroyed, and there was nothing anyone could have done to stop it. Robin Williams didn't give up. His brain was being taken from him. His widow speaks. A year after Robin's death, Susan Schneider Williams wrote an essay titled "The Terrorist Inside My Husband's Brain." The title was perfect because that's exactly what it was, an invisible terrorist destroying him from within. Susan described the hell of watching her husband disappear. She'd see the fear in his eyes as he struggled to understand what was happening to him. Robin was acutely aware that something was catastrophically wrong. He'd spent his whole life inside that brilliant mind, and now it was betraying him. Imagine the terror of that. She detailed symptoms the public never knew about. Robin couldn't remember why he'd walked into a room. He'd get lost in his own neighborhood. He experienced delusions and hallucinations. His motor control was failing, and perhaps worst of all, he knew it was happening. His awareness came and went, but in his lucid moments, he was fully conscious of his decline. Susan revealed that in the months before his death, they'd seen multiple specialists. Everyone had theories: depression, Parkinson's, anxiety, maybe a combination. They adjusted medications constantly. Nothing helped. Robin underwent every test available, but Lewy body dementia is notoriously difficult to diagnose definitively while someone is alive. The only certain diagnosis comes from autopsy. Robin was losing his mind, and he was aware of it, Susan wrote. That sentence captures the horror of what he experienced. For someone whose mind was his greatest gift, his livelihood, his identity, feeling it slip away was unbearable. Susan believes that in his final night, Robin made a decision based on what he knew. His life as he understood it was over, and what remained would only get worse. The legacy of loss. Robin Williams' death became a watershed moment for mental health awareness, though not quite in the way people initially thought. The first wave of response focused on suicide prevention and depression, which was important. But the revelation about Lewy body dementia shifted the conversation towards something even more complex: the intersection of neurological disease and mental health. The Robin Williams Foundation was established to raise awareness and fund research into Lewy body dementia. Susan became an advocate, speaking openly about the disease and the need for better diagnostic tools. Before Robin's death, few people talked about this disease. Now it's part of the broader conversation about dementia and neurodegenerative disorders. His death also highlighted how little we still understand about the brain. Here was a man with access to the best doctors in the world, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong until it was too late. That's both humbling and terrifying. It reminds us that for all our medical advances, the brain remains largely mysterious. The entertainment industry was forced to reckon with its relationship with mental health. Robin had been open about his struggles, yet he'd still felt pressure to perform, to be on, to meet everyone's expectations. His death prompted conversations about the cost of fame, the pressure on performers, and the importance of creating space for people to be human rather than always entertaining. Watch Robin's performances now, and there's an added layer of poignancy. When he improvises in Good Morning Vietnam or riffs during interviews,
Good morning, Vietnam!
You're watching that incredible mind at full power. Knowing what would eventually happen to that brain makes those moments both beautiful and heartbreaking. His comedy specials feel like gifts now, preserved moments of genius before it was stolen from him. People still quote his movies, still show his films to their kids, still remember where they were when they heard he died. That's legacy. But maybe the more important legacy is the conversation he forced us to have about mental health, about dementia, about the complexity of the human brain, and about how we should support people who are suffering rather than expecting them to always make us smile. Robin Williams spent his life making other people happy, often at the cost of his own peace. In his death, he's teaching us still, teaching us to take brain health seriously, to understand that what looks like a mental health crisis might be something more complex, and to remember that the funniest people are often fighting the hardest battles. We lost him too soon, but not because he wasn't strong enough. We lost him to a disease that's only now beginning to be understood. His story is tragic, but it's also a call to action, to research, to understand, to do better.